Good afternoon, and I want to thank you for inviting me to this afternoon's conference. A special thanks to the Transportation Infrastructure Durability Center for inviting me today. My name is Mark Rolfe. I'm the Deputy Commissioner at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. Today's presentation, I'm going to spend a little time talking about some background on the Connecticut DOT. I'll describe the scope of the Connecticut rail system, and I will spend some time talking about a new initiative Governor Lamont has announced. It's called Time for CT, about how we're going to improve rail service throughout the state of Connecticut. And then I'll talk a little bit about the implications to the Northeast Corridor and to the region at large from that program. Connecticut DOT is the nation's oldest DOT. It has a storied history. We built, operate, and maintain the Merritt Parkway, one of the country's first limited access highways. We also built, operate, and maintain the Connecticut Turnpike, now Interstate 95, one of the first modern limited access highways in the country. We own, manage Metro North, the New Haven, with Metro North, the New Haven line. It is often cited as the busiest commuter rail line in the nation. We also operate two ferries operating on the Connecticut River. These are the oldest continuously operating ferries in the nation, with one dating back to 1655. That's 121 years before our country's founding. This infographic shows the many different aspects of Connecticut's vast transportation network. In 2019, total transit ridership was 38 million. Approximately 2.8 million people had registered vehicles, and rail ridership numbers exceeded 41 million. All this in a state where the population is only 3.5 million. The rail ridership includes the New Haven line, which is, as I mentioned, considered one of the busiest, if not the busiest, commuter rail corridors in the country. Like many other sectors of our economy and our nation, COVID-19 changed behaviors and it changed the demands on our transportation system. This is a map describing the statewide rail system. The different colors represent different rail corridors within the state. The red corridor going north-south through the middle of the state is the Hartford line. The yellow corridor in southwestern Connecticut is the New Haven line, which includes the Waterbury, Danbury, and New Canaan branches. The pink or purple line extending east from New Haven is Shoreline East commuter rail service. The blue line is Amtrak intercity rail service. So you can see 4 different operators in a relatively compact area across the state. Connecticut DOT has the good fortune of owning a substantial portion of the Northeast Corridor between Boston and DC. The 49.4 route miles between New Haven and the state line in Greenwich are owned by the state and operated and maintained by Metro North Commuter Railroad under a unique partnership agreement between the agency. Connecticut DOT is responsible for 100% of the capital costs and a 65% share of the operating expenses with Metro North. Before COVID, the New Haven line is 3 branches, moved more than 40 million people. Ownership of that 49 miles has given Connecticut DOT a great deal of control over service levels and also future development of the rail line. In addition to the New Haven line, Connecticut DOT contracts with Amtrak to operate Shoreline East, a 30-year-old service along Connecticut's southeastern coastline. Amtrak provides the service with Connecticut DOT-owned rail cars and locomotives over the Amtrak-owned Northeast Corridor between New Haven and New London. More recently, beginning in June 2018, Connecticut DOT launched the first and still only high-speed intercity passenger rail service. It was founded under the Obama administration era stimulus program. Connecticut DOT was successful in competing for high-speed intercity passenger rail funding funding that was rejected by other states, including Wisconsin and Florida. This $700 million program added a second track to most of the line, constructed or rebuilt 5 stations, and upgraded maximum speeds from 80 miles per hour to 110 miles per hour. Hartford Line service is also unique in how service is provided. It is a blend of 2 services operated by Amtrak and Transit America Service, or TASI. The integrated train schedules and common set of fares gives travelers maximum flexibility. The service was the fastest growing rail service in the Northeast, with double-digit compounded annual growth rates. That was, of course, before COVID. So, speaking of COVID, rail ridership in Connecticut, just as elsewhere, continues to be impacted by COVID and the movement toward more of a remote or teleworking workforce. This graph shows ridership by percentage loss in ridership for each line. The New Haven line system in the last 2 months averaged almost 1.4 million riders. That is 41.3% of the pre-COVID ridership. The Hartford line averaged about 35,000 riders per day. That's a little bit higher at 54.2% of pre-COVID levels. And the Shoreline East ridership is now averaging about 13,500 per day, which is dramatically lower at only about 20% of pre-COVID levels. While rail ridership has decreased in Connecticut, real estate purchases in Connecticut have been trending upwards since the start of COVID. Many people are moving from New York City to Connecticut suburbs. As teleworking becomes part of the norm, longer trip times to New York City from Connecticut become more tolerable if someone only has to do it a few times a week. Door-to-door travel times for the outer reaches of the Metro North operated service typically exceed 2 hours today. If you're making the trip only once or twice a week, you can accept that as a trade-off for the affordable housing and great schools. It's clear that the economic impact of the New Haven line is enormous to Connecticut. The southwestern region of the state is Connecticut's leading GDP generator, with the majority of the state's rail ridership occurring in that region. It's fair to say that rail service is critical to the economic vitality of the state. Early on in Governor Lamont's administration, he targeted improved rail service as key to economic vitality for the state. You'll see here a quote from the governor. He recognized that passenger rail service was as an economic imperative. Through the 2010s, the busiest railroad in the nation was struggling to keep pace with demand. Ironically, as service levels increased to every 30 minutes throughout the day, the ridership surged to record levels. Travel times got progressively slower. The fastest trains today are 20 minutes slower than trains operated 70 years ago. Governor Lamont directed Connecticut DOT to get train service back on the fast track. His travel time reduction program is known as Time for CT. You can read the quote on the slide for yourself, but this is the governor's commitment to expediting train service around the state. At Governor Lamont's direction, Connecticut DOT completed the first ever comprehensive analysis of the New Haven line to determine what can be done now to speed up service. The plan needed to be achievable in the near term and affordable. The result is a 12-year investment program of $8 to $10 billion to rebuild the railroad for faster service, reducing trip times by as much as 25 minutes for CT Rail Metro North service and Amtrak trains. More on that in a minute. This plan is now part of the Northeast Corridor Commission's Connect NEC 2035 plan. This plan describes improved rail service between Boston and Washington, D.C. Connecticut DOT and our rail partners at Metro North Railroad and Amtrak are actively preparing for the expected influx of federal funding from the Northeast Corridor and other rail programs. To that end, we have already initiated engineering on several segments of rail improvements. We do believe that we'll be well positioned to leverage for new federal dollars when they become, don't want to say if, when they become available. There's both program money and grant money that would become available for Connecticut's rail program and for the Northeast Corridor in general. When we embarked on the planning effort to improve travel time, a couple of strategic goals were paramount. Yes, we wanted to achieve trip time reductions, but we also knew our plan had to be acceptable to our host communities. The New Haven line travels through some of the most densely populated areas of the nation. We needed a plan that did not require the taking of homes and businesses. We also needed a plan that was realistic from a funding standpoint. One that was affordable and could be implemented incrementally was one of the key goals. This led us to solutions that we could deliver along the current rail alignment. If we wanted to deliver benefits this decade, we had to stay within the existing right-of-way, more or less. This ensured we would not face protracted environmental reviews and community pushback. This also enabled us to phase much of the work as funding would allow. Our plan for improved travel time has three areas of focus: service enhancements, railroad infrastructure, and rail fleet. All three areas must be improved if we are to be successful in achieving the reduced travel time goals we have set. I will talk about each of those goals next. This may seem obvious, but the most straightforward way to improve service is by running limited stop express trains. There are 29 stations between New Haven Union Station and Grand Central Terminal in New York. The study team reviewed every train trip in the New Haven line schedule with both Metro-North and Amtrak. Express service can be challenging on a busy railroad, one which sees more than 350 trains per day. Connecticut DOT with Metro-North and Amtrak proposed to launch new Super Express train service for commuters beginning as early as 2022. Train service to Grand Central Terminal or even Penn Station will operate 10 minutes faster from New Haven than current service. This amounts to cumulative savings of 80 hours of travel time savings on an annual basis for commuters between New Haven and New York. That is more than 3 full days of time given back to people and their families. The frequency of direct service, that's a one-seat ride to New York City, will vary on the branch lines. The time for CT service enhancement, if fully implemented, would provide a minimum half-hourly service during peak hours, those being between 6 and 9 a.m. and 4 and 7 p.m., generally speaking. And for the rest of the day, hourly service. Direct service on the Hartford line to New York City would also follow this pattern. As mentioned on the previous slide, the team has developed a service plan enabling 10 minutes of travel time savings and a one-seat ride on the Shoreline East service to New York City as early as 2022, pending funding approval from the federal and state governments. This will be accomplished by a pilot Super Express train, meaning it will make limited stop service at New Haven, Bridgeport, and Stamford, and then on to New York City. Over the next 10 plus years, additional savings can be achieved through infrastructure and fleet improvements. Up to an additional 15 minutes of travel time savings are possible if all of these infrastructure improvements are made. I'll discuss those next in the next few slides. The department's goal is to make service enhancements on all Connecticut rail lines to provide faster and more direct and more frequent service by integrating new direct connections into the service plan and to eliminate unneeded transfers to better connect Connecticut business centers and enhancing intra-Connecticut travel. Although the time for CT plan starts with service, there are things that can be done to the infrastructure to further improve travel time. The time for CT study included an exhaustive review of every mile of railroad to look for tweaks and opportunities to improve the infrastructure and enhance speed along the line. Highlights of the plan include complete signal modernization that will allow operating train speeds to be increased to 90, 100 miles per hour. Removal of temporary traffic speed restrictions. These were imposed before positive train control. That has now been implemented on the New Haven main line and is well underway for the Waterbury branch line. We're looking to replace many of the open deck structures carrying the New Haven line over local roads. We'll replace those with ballasted decks, which can have a much higher operating speed. We're going to look at track speed improvements to enhance speed through those curves. And then there's many slow orders along the New Haven line due to drainage issues, and those can be easily fixed with the proper attention. And then finally, there are 4 movable bridge structures, historic bridge structures between 100 and 125 years old along the Northeast Corridor New Haven line that need to be replaced. So one of the first projects to move forward to construction in the Time 1 program, that's a component or segment of the Time for CT larger program. This program will straighten track curves, modify overhead catenary, and install new train signals to elevate speeds to that 100-mile-per-hour goal, making it the fastest segment on the New Haven line. Construction on those initial infrastructure improvements is slated to begin in 2024. The rail fleet is the third strategic area of focus in the Time for CT plan. The current locomotive hauled rail fleet is limited to 79 miles an hour. Some of the rail cars and locomotives exceed 40 years old. It is time to upgrade the rail fleet for faster service and to improve the onboard customer experience. Connecticut DOT is seeking proposals currently to replace the rail cars and grow the fleet for new services. Connecticut DOT is also considering new locomotives like the one pictured here that can operate on diesel or overhead catenary. These purchases will enable direct service from all locations in Connecticut to New York City. Also, the upgraded fleet will be capable of maximum operating speeds of up to 125 miles per hour, which will allow incremental improvement in service as the railroad is upgraded throughout the state. Highlights of the service include completion of the ongoing contract for 66 new M8 rail coaches, purchase of additional cars for the Hartford Line and Shoreline East services. We have an option for 72 other cars that will enable the express services that I previously mentioned. And we're also looking to buy 18 or more dual power locomotives to provide direct service from the non-electrified lines into New York City. Of course, to go along with that, rail yard improvements will also be necessary, and some of those are already underway with a new storage yard under construction in New Haven. Planning continues to further expand and modernize rail yards to support the new and expanded rail fleet. The Time for CT investment in upgrading the Connecticut rail network includes several state of good repair backlog projects that today result in reduced train speeds and limit the capacity to operate express services. Long overdue replacement of the Housatonic River or Devon Bridge, the Saugatuck River or Sauga Bridge, the Norwalk River or Walk Bridge, and the Minas River or Coscob movable bridges represent a significant investment that is necessary to increase speeds and improve overall performance. As I mentioned, those are the historic movable bridge structures on the New Haven line. We're currently have a project underway at the Walk Bridge. That's the bridge in Norwalk, and that bridge is going to cost in excess of $700 million to replace. So taken in total, these bridges, they're all major bridges, sorely in need of repair or replacement. It's a multi-billion-dollar effort to complete that work. Similarly, partnering with Amtrak to replace the Connecticut River Bridge will also contribute to improved performance. Capacity and speed together contribute to the trip time and reliability enhancements that will be delivered with the Time for CT program. These 5 bridges represent more than $3 billion of total Time for CT investment. Time for CT also includes approximately $500 million in new Connecticut rail cars. That expanded fleet will require similar expansion of yards and maintenance facilities. All of the identified infrastructure and fleet and rail yard improvements are necessary to achieve the full Time for CT service enhancements, including the 25-minute savings that we hope to achieve. Time for CT is a piece of the Connect NEC 2035 puzzle. It is complementary to the larger vision for the entire Northeast Corridor. You might ask, what is Connect NEC 2035? It is a 15-year plan representing the most ambitious reinvestment program in the NEC's history. In a way, a new way of planning, it's a multi-agency, multi-year shared action plan guided by a long-term vision. It includes 8 states, it includes 6 operating railroads, and all the state governments of the Northeast, the federal government, and Amtrak work together through the NEC Commission to develop a detailed and efficient sequencing of infrastructure investment covering more than 150 projects along the corridor between Boston and Washington, D.C. The implementation of C35 or Connect 35 will result in a modern and resilient railroad with safe, reliable, and more frequent service, connections to new markets, and reduced travel times between communities. C35 is the first phase of a long-term vision for the corridor established in the Federal Railroad Administration's 2017 NEC Future Plan. Makes significant improvements to the NEC rail service for both existing and new riders on both commuter rail systems and the Amtrak intercity service. In conclusion, Connecticut DOT is about to undertake an historic investment program in modern, high-performing rail service. Time for CT is a feasible and affordable plan. It will be achieved through both service improvements, infrastructure improvements, and investments in our fleet. These investments will achieve historic travel times between New Haven and New York City and will undoubtedly pay for themselves by improving the quality of life for residents, improving productivity, raising property values, and leveraging rail service for TOD and community development. You can see on the slide here what the goal is. 3 years or 2 years from now, we hope to achieve that 10-minute savings, 25 minutes by 2032. If we do that, we'll have achieved the fastest travel times on the New Haven line since the 1950s. A bit ironic, I know. At this point, I'd like to turn it back to Ramesh for any questions that you might have. Ramesh, I leave it to you.